Brown. Coming up, the latest coronavirus briefing from Downing Street, led by the Prime Minister. Our headlines. Return to lockdown in the next half an hour. Boris Johnson will explain more about how and why he decided on England's latest restrictions. He's holding a news conference alongside his top medical and scientific advisors as the UK records a record number of daily coronavirus cases. To help companies through the latest lockdown, the Chancellor announces one-off top-up grants worth up to £9,000 for the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors.
The Prime Minister has acted decisively in the face of new information, and we have had now to grapple with a new variant of the virus, and that's caused an uptick in cases and hospitalisations and deaths, as the Prime Minister set out, and it was right that we acted.
It's back to remote online learning for millions of school pupils, but questions remain about how those who were facing exams will be assessed. The vaccine rollout ramps up as the government promises to vaccinate 13 million people by the middle of February. Hello, welcome to this BBC News special ahead of the latest coronavirus briefing from Downing Street. It starts in around half an hour's time, led by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and it follows the introduction of a third national lockdown for England, joining Scotland, which went into lockdown at midnight. Wales and Northern Ireland started theirs in December. And it comes as the UK has posted a record number of infections in a single day, with 60,916 new cases, and another 830 people have also died within 28 days of a positive test. Let's just take a look at today's latest developments. Well, people in England and most of Scotland are being told to stay at home, except for a handful of permitted reasons, such as essential shopping, exercise and work. GCSE and A-level exams in England have been cancelled as schools across the country are forced to close. And meanwhile, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, has announced a support package for businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors, with one-off grants available of up to £9,000. We will have the latest from across the UK and reaction to the lockdown restrictions as we look ahead to that Downing Street briefing. And let's just remind you of those latest figures that we've just had in the last few minutes. A record number of coronavirus cases in the UK, more than 60,000 for the first time, 60,916, that's up from 58,784 yesterday, and that in itself was a new record. And in terms of deaths, the latest figure on deaths is 830. That's up from just over 400 yesterday. And let's go to our political correspondent Ian Watson ahead of that news conference from Downing Street, and a very grim backdrop to that Downing Street briefing with these figures, record number of cases and 830 deaths.
It is very grim indeed, Ben, just as grim as the weather here too, the storm clouds moving in, and against this very depressing backdrop, I think the Prime Minister will be trying to do two things. First of all, to say actually look how serious this situation is, to try to get people to comply with the new lockdown restrictions. But also I think he'll be wanting to give some hope too. He'll want to update people on the government's vaccination programme. The government's insisting that it has already vaccinated more people in the UK than the rest of Europe put together, and I think he'll want to say, look, this is the way out of our current predicament. So although it's going to be tough for the next 6 or 7 weeks, perhaps even longer, there is going to be some hope. He's got a very, very ambitious target of trying to get some of the most vulnerable people and alongside that, some of the frontline staff in the NHS, care home staff as well, vaccinated nearly 14 million people by the middle of next month. And again, he'll be trying to convince people that that target is realistic. But I think the way in which this lockdown was announced, when, for example, on Sunday, the Prime Minister was telling children in most parts of England to go to school on Monday, and then on Monday telling them not to go to school today, that's raised some questions about how the government has been handling the decision-making process. Conservative MPs as well as opposition MPs have been very concerned about that. And there'll be further questions, I think, for the Prime Minister on a range of other issues. What's going to happen with exams in England precisely.
Who gives
We're
a
not
shit
due
about
to hear
exams,
from
man?
the Education Secretary until Parliament's recalled tomorrow, for example. And is the economic package announced by the Chancellor strong enough? These grants for businesses, Ben, that you were mentioning, people are saying actually what the Chancellor has to do now is give more money to people, sick pay, to encourage them to self-isolate. He's got to say he's willing to extend the furlough scheme further, and he seems to be putting those decisions off until the budget in March. So I think there'll be huge numbers of questions for the Prime Minister to answer, but what he'll like to do, I think, amidst that very grim backdrop of rising hospital admissions and rising numbers of deaths, is to say, look, help is on the way with the vaccine and we've made a good start.
Ian, thank you. We'll be talking to you again later. Ian Watson there, our political correspondent. So let's just remind ourselves then of the new rules for England that were announced by the Prime Minister last night. They will become law tomorrow. They're due to be reviewed on February the 15th. People are being told to stay at home unless they have a reason to leave home, like the first lockdown in March of last year. Those include shopping for essential medical needs, food shopping, exercise and work for those who can't work from home. All schools and colleges have closed to most pupils, with remote online learning until February half term. The summer exams for GCSEs and A-levels have been cancelled. Early years settings such as nurseries will stay open. Restaurants can continue to offer food delivery, but takeaway alcohol is banned. And outdoor sports venues will close, but playgrounds can stay open. Let's talk to our health correspondent, Nick Triggle, and let's just reflect on the latest figures we've had on coronavirus, Nick. Very grim, as we were saying, 60,000, more than 60,000 new cases, 830 deaths.
Yes, the numbers of new cases, we're seeing 4 times the level of infection as we were back at the start of December. So it has really risen rapidly. Prior to today, we'd had 6 days of over 50,000 cases a day. So these are very high. And these infections are next week's hospital admissions. And we know from the data today and the data we've been hearing about last few days that hospitals are incredibly busy. In England, we haven't got the whole UK picture for today, but in England, yesterday there was just over 26,000 patients with COVID in hospital. That's a 50% increase since Christmas Day alone. On average, 3 in 10 beds are occupied by COVID patients now. In some hospitals, it's over 6 in 10. Sadly, 830 new deaths confirmed. Tuesdays are always higher because of the lag over the weekend. Also, Scotland hasn't been reporting for 4 days into the deaths total, so that is has lifted those numbers a bit higher than you'd normally expect. On average, we're seeing about 600 deaths a day. That's 50% higher than it was at the start of December.
And of course, as the Prime Minister keeps saying, the vaccine is the way out of all of this. What's the latest on the rollout of the vaccine? Because the government are aiming for 2 million vaccinations a week. It's a big aim, isn't it? A big ambition. How close are they towards getting there?
It's a huge challenge. By mid-February, they want to vaccinate the 4 highest risk groups, the over 70s, frontline health and care staff, and the extremely clinically vulnerable. So far, 1 million patients have been vaccinated, but they're trying to get to 13 million. As you say, that will require 2 million doses, patients a day being vaccinated. At the moment, we've actually got enough vaccine in the country to vaccinate all those. The issue is it's not ready for the NHS to use because there's several processes that they have to go through. The first one is once the actual vaccine substance is manufactured, it has to be put in vials. It's called fill and finish, and there's a shortage of ingredients, huge global demand for this sort of service. So there's a bit of a backlog there. Once it is in those vials, it then goes to the regulator so they can check and test every batch to make sure it's safe and it is what it's meant to be. Again, that can take a couple of weeks, and that means this week there was actually only 1 million doses available for the NHS. That's being used, and I'm told those numbers will be increasing in the coming weeks, and the government is confident within weeks it can be doing 2 million doses a week, which will enable it to meet its mid-February target. But a lot has to go right. It's a complex chain, and a lot has to go right.
Yeah, let's hope it does. Nick, thank you very much indeed. Nick Triggle there, our health correspondent. So with another lockdown being the very last thing that businesses needed right now, as we've heard, the Chancellor has stepped in to try to stave off a fresh wave of closures and, of course, redundancy. Andy Verity has this report.
For businesses forced once again by antivirus measures to shut,
Being in a cash flow crisis with too little money coming in to pay suppliers, landlords and creditors is a painful new normal. The Bank of England's calculated this financial year firms have £180 billion less money flowing in than they need to pay bills. And that was before the new lockdown, which will hit them even harder.
We've announced £4.6 billion of additional help. For businesses in the most affected sectors who are asked to close, they will receive up to £9,000 in a one-off cash grant. It's important to remember that comes on top of the existing monthly grants of £3,000 that those businesses receive and the extension of furlough all the way through to April. We remain committed to protecting jobs and supporting businesses.
That doesn't protect jobs.
Firms like this Manchester gin distillery and bar are likely to get the grants and welcome any support they can get. But after the Christmas they've had, they're by no means sure it will be enough to get them through months more of lockdown.
We were planning in December to try and reopen in early February. Those plans are out the window. All the money we spent on staff planning to reopen, you can't just reopen a business. You can't open the doors the next day when you can. It takes 3 or 4 weeks of proper planning and retraining of staff.
Groups representing smaller companies like this one have already protested that the support measures don't go far enough to match the scale of the economic damage being done by renewed lockdown. They want a much bigger plan to support firms throughout 2021.
If what we have is a period of drip feed support to businesses rather than some consistency until the point of reopening and until we see that bounce back, I think that will hurt more businesses than it will help.
£4.6 billion in normal times is a substantial sum, but the government's already spent more than £280 billion tackling coronavirus. Businesses hit by the new lockdown will apply all the pressure they can to press the government for more. Andy Verity, BBC News.
And we can talk now to the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Thank you very much for being with us on BBC News. What's your reaction to what the Chancellor's announced, £9,000 for businesses? He says this will help businesses get through the months ahead and, critically, it will help sustain jobs.
It's certainly welcome as far as it goes, and that money, the £9,000, will help hospitality businesses in particular that have had a really rough time. Obviously, they lost the Christmas trading period, which has been devastating for them. So that is good news. But there's always a but, I'm afraid there is a very big but here. The government continues to ignore 3 million taxpayers, people who are freelancers or people who were newly self-employed, who've had nothing since the start of all of this. And I just don't see how 3 million fellow citizens can be left out in the cold with no support at all. And, now, in this third national lockdown, it just seems to me the government has to do something for that group. Many of these people are people who are self-employed or they run their own companies, and it's just wrong that they're left worried sick now about how they're going to make things work as we go into a new year and another lockdown.
Overall, though, the Chancellor says, his schemes throughout this pandemic have been very generous. He's heading towards £300 billion worth of spending. I mean, mind-boggling figures.
Yeah, they are mind-boggling figures, and I want to be fair. I mean, he did work in a very effective way at the start, getting money out of the door quickly. And I remember some of those early press conferences that Rishi Sunak gave last year. They were really impressive. He said he would do whatever it takes and that no one would be left behind. Well, here we are, 9 or 10 months on, and people have been left behind, 3 million people. And it is the case that also others were overpaid. So we saw large supermarkets getting business rates relief, and they didn't need it. And rightly, many of them gave that back before Christmas. So I'm not necessarily saying to the Chancellor it was all easy, and it was always going to be a difficult challenge. But it is clear now there are a lot of people out there who've paid their taxes, who are actually about to receive tax demands from the Chancellor, who've had no public support whatsoever. And it really needs to be corrected. And what I would say to the Prime Minister is, please address this tonight. There are people who feel they've contributed to this country and are being completely ignored. I think it is time for them to receive some recognition from the Prime Minister. And if the government isn't prepared to do anything, I would call on Parliament to bring about a vote as soon as possible on this issue, because it just can't be left like this, where you have so many people up and down the country, small business people, in many ways, the backbone of the economy, just completely written out of the public support schemes.
More broadly, what would you say about the timing of this latest lockdown that was announced by the Prime Minister last night? He's clearly been desperate to avoid it, desperate to avoid shutting down schools, but he's been forced into it by the new variant.
Yes, I mean, obviously a difficult situation for everybody, and nobody wants restrictions, and I would certainly agree with the Prime Minister on that. But I guess it was unfortunate the way things unfolded over the weekend. It was clear what was happening, and the decision to open schools, I think, has caused a lot of unnecessary anguish for teaching staff and for parents and students as well. So it's difficult. Obviously, we are probably now in the right position, but that restriction and that lockdown needs to come with the support that I was just talking about before. And here's something where we all need now to kind of pull together in the Prime Minister's words. Get this vaccination programme right now. Let's not have it beset by some of the problems we've seen on PPE or test and trace. Let's get this right. Let's work together to meet this mid-February target. And I certainly would say to him tonight, we in Greater Manchester are absolutely ready to play our part in that, but we need the government to help us as well. So at the moment, we can't get the data that we need around the progress of the vaccination programme. The government needs to work in partnership with regional and local leaders to get this vaccination programme moving as quickly as possible. And I hope he would agree with me on that.
You've said in the past we've come out of lockdown too soon, too prematurely. Do you think this timescale that's been set as the middle of February, is that about right?
Well, I noticed the Prime Minister was cautious on that last night, and he didn't commit, and he's probably right to do that. I think if you look back to the middle of last year, it is clear to me that national lockdown was lifted too early for the north of England. And that trapped us in a position for the second half of 2020, which was very, very difficult indeed, where we just couldn't get the cases down and people here were living under permanent restrictions. Now, that isn't where we should be at all. What we've got to do now is kind of approach this new year, get the vaccination programme right, and make careful decisions that are right for all parts of the country. It's clear that this new variant is posing a very significant risk, not just to the NHS, but of course to the population. So, we need to work together, and I think the more that he works with us in partnership, I think the stronger the response will be. We need to learn some lessons from last year, where there was a lot of top-down, London-centric decision-making. I think we need to kind of move beyond that now, work together more in partnership, and plot our exit route from this ongoing nightmare, which is what it's been for everybody.
All right, Andy, good to talk to you. Andy Burnham there. Thank you so much for your time. Well, we were bringing you the latest coronavirus case figures, which have gone over the 60,000 figure for the first time today. Just some reaction from Yvonne Doyle, Medical Director of Public Health England, who says the rapid rise in cases is highly concerning, will sadly mean yet more pressure on our health services in the depths of winter. This is why, if we can, we stay at home, reduce contacts and do everything possible to break the spread of the virus. It is by no means easy, but now more than ever, we must all do our part to protect the NHS and save lives. And we can talk now to Professor Neil Ferguson, epidemiologist at Imperial College London, who in March predicted that up to 500,000 Britons could die from COVID-19. That led to the government enforcing the first nationwide lockdown. Professor Ferguson, do you think that, what would you say about the timing of this lockdown, this third lockdown?
I mean, I think it was in the nick of time. I mean, I think it was inevitable that we would need it, and unfortunately that schools would have to stay shut. What we've seen is a very rapid increase in cases of this new variant.
The fact that 500,000 people
actually, if you
died.
disentangle cases between the old variant and new variant, you get a much clearer picture. Even in places like Greater Manchester, the north of England, the new variant has been expanding very quickly up till Christmas. And then what we've seen over the Christmas break, I mean, people didn't make many contacts in that time, is a kind of plateauing of numbers, certainly in the younger age groups with schools shut, but unfortunately not numbers coming down. I mean, numbers still increasing day on day, and we can just hope that this new lockdown will enable us to at least flatten the curve. And I think we have to be very realistic about expectations. This new variant is 50 to 70% more transmissible than the old one. So people should not expect the impact of this new lockdown to be what we saw back in March of last year.
Would you have liked this lockdown to have been brought in earlier by the government?
I mean, I think, to be fair, the government responded to the evidence around this new variant relatively quickly. I mean, within hours of the Prime Minister being informed back in December in terms of introduction of Tier 4. And Tier 4 measures are not that different from the full lockdown. I think the big thing which has changed now is we're keeping schools shut, which I realise is disappointing to very many parents, including myself. But unfortunately, with the increased transmissibility of this variant, it's necessary to get as many contacts eliminated, frankly, from the population as possible to have a chance of keeping it under control.
And you've talked about how devastating this new variant has been. The trouble is there are other new variants, aren't there? There will be more. There's one in South Africa we're hearing about right now. Yes,
and I tend to agree. Whilst the data is patchy on it at the moment, I share Matt Hancock's concerns that is probably also more transmissible, similar to the new UK variant, but there's a slightly greater chance that it may be, let's say, vaccines may be slightly less effective against it. We're still waiting for the virological data, the experimental data, to tell us one way or another. But there are changes in a critical part of the virus, in what's called the receptor binding site of the spike protein, which are not present in the UK new variant, which make the South African variant particularly concerning.
Deeply concerning, but we are told the vaccine is the light at the end of the tunnel. It's the way out of this. Does that apply to all these new variants? I mean, I know it's impossible to predict what other variants there may be in the future, but are you confident that the vaccines that are now available will be able to cope?
No. Well, we have increasing confidence that they'll cope with the UK new variant, which is, frankly, is 90% of cases in London right now. So, I mean, that is good news. As to whether variants will come up in the future, or whether the South African variant vaccines will be less affected by vaccines, that remains to be seen. It's not likely to be all or nothing. The worst case is probably a reduction in the effectiveness of vaccines. But it's quite likely, if we look further forward, 6 months, a year, that a virus like this, a bit like influenza, may well mutate to try and escape the selection pressure, the evolutionary pressure imposed by vaccines, and we may need to update vaccines. Frankly, I mean, that's quite a long way off, though. We need to focus really on using the effective vaccines we have now and rolling them out in the population to protect as many vulnerable people as possible.
And if the rollout of the vaccine is as the government hopes and plans, up to 2 million doses a week, what are your projections for this year as we look ahead to 2021? When are we going to be out of this?
Let's make a note of these.
I've said repeatedly, and I'll say again, it's not going to be an event, it'll be a process. If we can protect those most at risk of severe disease, of hospitalisation, of death, then that in its own, even if the vaccine does nothing else, will reduce number of deaths and pressure on the healthcare system, and will allow us to relax measures to some extent. What we really don't know, though, at the moment is, does the vaccine reduce transmission? Does it block infection? If it has a significant impact on transmission, then we'll be able to relax measures faster than if it doesn't. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to see some relaxation, at least getting out of lockdown in the March timeframe. But it will be very much a gradual process from then through to the end of the year.
And last question. You were, of course, an early advocate of lockdown, as I mentioned. Well, you've been called Professor Lockdown. Do you think, though, that we are, as we enter this third lockdown, psychologically as a nation, are we beginning to get used to the idea of a lockdown, which is, was pretty alien to us as a concept at the beginning of all of this?
I mean, I think it's remarkable how, well, not just in the UK, but around the world, people have changed, everyday behaviour so fundamentally in order to control the spread of a virus, which has the risk of killing, many of the most vulnerable and elderly in society.
So many people are happy
I mean, I'm
to
heartily sick of this pandemic, as I'm sure many other people are. But yes, I have been constantly amazed about, I mean, really quite selfless actions from the great majority of people who are not at risk themselves of severe outcomes of this, in order to, as the PM said, protect the NHS and save lives.
Professor Neil Ferguson, very good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. Professor Ferguson there, the epidemiologist from Imperial College London. Now, train services in England are to be cut during the national lockdown. The extent of those cuts hasn't yet been confirmed, but some in the rail industry are anticipating reductions of up to 50%. Since the first lockdown in March, the government spent billions of pounds covering the fall in ticket revenue due to low passenger numbers. The government's expected to announce further restrictions on international travel later on. Michael Gove has said that measures are being discussed to make sure that ports and airports are as safe as possible, and it is believed that travellers may be required to have a negative test result before coming to the United Kingdom.
Guessing you can't hear me.
So, although the lockdown announced by Boris Johnson last night does apply to England, there are strict measures in place across the UK, of course. In a moment, we'll get the latest from our correspondent, Howell Griffith, who's in Cardiff.
Can you hear me?
Though, this from Alexander Mackenzie in Glasgow.
Cool. Right, let's have a look.
This is Scotland's first day back into lockdown. Scotland went back into lockdown at midnight, so much tougher restrictions. That's due to carry on until the end.
Oh, you can play it on here. Okay,
let's do that. Even further if the number of cases continue to rise.
Can you hear that?
Now it means that all of mainland Scotland and some island communities cannot leave their homes. They're under a strict stay-at-home order, and it's illegal to leave your home unless for some essential purposes. Everyone there has to work from home and should not be travelling to work.
We're probably going to be in this until the end of the year, and it's dependent on whether the...
Wait, the end of the year?
Yeah, gradually over...
You can only meet one person,
but it'll depend on whether the vaccine prevents transmissibility.
Oh, son of a fuck! Oh well, there you go. You see, I prefer a different Dr. Lockdown. I'm an Anthony Fauci man. Son of a bitch.
Wales has been in national lockdown since December the 20th. For the last fortnight, it's been a legal requirement for people here to stay at home, unless they're going out to exercise or to shop, or if they have to leave their home for work. Of course, that means non-essential shops being closed, bars and restaurants all being closed. The question is, when will they get to open again? There's a review at the end of this week, but the Welsh Government has already warned there's very little headroom. Many foresee the Welsh lockdown staying in place until the end of January. One change that's happened within the last 24 hours is the extension of school closures. No face-to-face learning in Wales until at least January the 18th. Many in the teaching profession wonder whether that will be enough, given that England and Scotland will have their schools closed.
Because that means there's going to be 2 years worth of kids that have nothing.
Can happen. However,
do you know what I mean?
The Education Minister told the BBC today, keeping children at home has grave consequences. She is keen.
How are they going to assess them?
They will examine the evidence.
As much as I hate the EU, on mainland Europe, you're graded more on like the entirety of your year, with exams only being like 40% of your overall grade. So I kind of think like we should switch. This is a great opportunity to switch to a more coursework-oriented schooling.
Reporting there. The Northern Ireland executive has been meeting this
afternoon. I think it's a little bit of a joke that every year you have like thousands of kids who are like fucked because the exam was slightly harder or slightly easier. Do you know what I mean? Like, whereas if you worked hard your entire year, you shouldn't have to you shouldn't have to be fucked over by like government cancelling exams.
Just want to bring you some latest
plus just the pressure of like having 2 hours to remember a load of stuff and just regurgitate it.
This is a remarkable
figure. Yeah.
1 in 50 people in private households in England had COVID-19 between December the 27th and January the 2nd. That's the Office for National Statistics saying that an estimated 1 in 50 people in private households in England between those days, December the 27th and January the 2nd, had COVID-19. Right, let's go to our political correspondent Ian Watson, because we're looking forward in the next few minutes to hearing from the Prime Minister and his scientific advisors. And lots of questions for Boris Johnson after his announcement last night about another lockdown for England.
Absolutely, Ben. I think from the Prime Minister's point of view, what he'll be doing is setting out...
So why don't we just have, they have those like flu camps where you go for like 3 weeks and they pay you to just sit in a bed for 3 weeks. Why didn't they just do that? Right, we're going to give everyone who wants to can have COVID and we'll pay you to stay in your house for 3 weeks.
Yeah. And the government's vaccination scheme, the government very keen to say they're vaccinating more people in the UK than so far the rest of Europe combined. But those questions, I think, will come fast and furious. Why did they decide on the lockdown only yesterday? Why was they telling children to go back to school in most parts of England on Sunday, then closing those schools on Monday evening? There will also be questions, I think, about the economic support package the Chancellor has been offering, whether that is going to be substantial enough, and if we could do more, for example, to pay people to isolate at home. So these will be some of the questions which I think the Prime Minister will be facing. But above all, I think people will be wondering what really changed the Prime Minister's mind. Why did they go from this tiered system into another third national lockdown? What was it that Chris Whitty and other chief medical officers from around the UK told the Prime Minister that was so compelling? They've now moved the alert level up to its highest rung, level 5, a danger in some places of the NHS potentially being overwhelmed in a few weeks' time. But Boris Johnson's critics have been saying, look, this new variant, its potential danger was identified in mid-December. Could he not have, for example, if he was bringing in these national restrictions, done it sooner, or could he not have done it in a way which gave people more warning? So there'll be questions about how decision-making takes place at the very heart of government, as well as specific questions about what happens in a whole range of areas where people need certainty over school exams and so on, and when perhaps restrictions in the future, and whether Boris Johnson's very ambitious target of nearly 40 million global people vaccinated by the middle of next month is realistic.
Here we go. Ian, thank you. Here is the Prime Minister, and the message on the lectern there: stay home, protect the NHS, save lives.
Good afternoon. I want to update everybody about vaccines, because across this entire country today, there are people, everybody, are making another huge sacrifice. Huge sacrifice.
Huge sacrifice. Ding, 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 ding.
Oh, where is with that? Online learning, businesses who have borne the brunt of successive lockdowns, and of course, the amazing staff of our NHS and our care workers who are grappling with this new variant of coronavirus. And I believe that when everybody looks at the position, people understand overwhelmingly that we have no choice. When the Office of National Statistics is telling us that more than 2% of the population is now infected, that's over 1 million people in England, and when today we've reported another 60,000 new cases. And when the number of patients in hospitals in England is now 40% higher than at the first peak in April. I think, obviously, everybody, you all, want to be sure that we in government are now using every second of this lockdown to put that invisible shield around the elderly and the vulnerable in the form of invisible shield, and so to begin to bring this crisis to an end. And I can tell you that this afternoon, with Pfizer and Oxford AstraZeneca combined, as of this afternoon, we've now vaccinated over 1.1 million people in England and over 1.3 million across the UK. And that includes more than 650,000 people over 80, which is 23% of all the over 80s in England. And that means that nearly 1 in 4 of one of the most vulnerable groups will have in 2 to 3 weeks, all of them, a significant degree of immunity.
No,
and when you consider that the average age of COVID fatalities is in the 80s, you can see the importance of what we have already achieved. And that's why I believe that the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation was right to draw up a programme aimed at saving the most lives the fastest. So by February the 15th, as I said last night, the NHS is committed to offering a vaccination to everyone in the top 4 priority groups, including older care home residents and staff, everyone over 70, all frontline NHS and care staff, and all those who are clinically extremely vulnerable. And to help us with meeting this target, we've already have 595 GP-led sites providing vaccines, with a further 180 coming on stream later this week. We have 107 hospital sites, with a further 100 later this week. So that's almost 1,000 sites, vaccination sites, across the country by the end of this week. And next week we will also have 7 vaccination centres opening in places such as sports stadium and exhibition centres. We know that there will still be long weeks ahead in which we must persevere with these restrictions, but I want to give you, the British people, the maximum possible transparency about this vaccine rollout, with more detail on Thursday and daily updates from Monday, so that you can see day by day and jab by jab how much progress we are making. Thanks very much. I'm now going to hand over to Chris to do the slides.
It's a bit short.
First slide, please.
Is that it? 6 minutes?
Just some updates in terms of data. In the 2 weeks from the 30th of December up to the 30th of December, the UK case rate increased by 70%. And as you can see from these 2 graphs, one of which is from the middle of December on the left, and one on the right, the map, is from the 30th of December. The darker colours are areas where there are very high rates of transmission. And as you can see across the whole of the UK, there has been a steady increase in the rates. Next slide, please. These are the most recent data from ONS, the Office for National Statistics. And what this shows is the number of people, and they do this on a random sampling basis, so this is a good estimate of the general population.
Depending on the sample size.
From August, when we actually had very low rates, so in the middle of September, for example, 1 in 900 people.
If you test 50 people, you find one of them is COVID. That's not very statistical.
And that brought down the rates. But then we had the problems of the new variant, which I'll come on to.
So we tested 25 people, one of them had symptoms but no COVID, so we've got to estimate 1 in 50 has the virus.
Increase since that time. And we're now into a situation where across the country as a whole, roughly 1 in 50 people have got the virus, higher in some parts of the country, lower in others. But 1 in 50 is really quite a very large number indeed. Next slide, please. If we look around England, what we find is that in every area, there has been a relative increase in the new variant of this virus that is spreading around the country. Fastest increase in the east of England, London and the southeast, but it is now taking off in other areas as well. In some of the areas where it took off to the highest level and Tier 4 was brought in during a period when schools were closed, there may be some early indications of some levelling off, but I think we shouldn't overinterpret that. But it is really clear that this new
we shouldn't overinterpret that. God forbid we open up the country.
And what we've seen is that the bits of the country which have got some of the lower rates and had previously controlled things, particularly in the northeast and northwest.
The population density in the southwest is negative. Like
in many of these,
in Cornwall, there's like 1 person every square kilometre.
We've got very high rates already.
It's like the anti-vax capital of the country as well, isn't it?
And this is inevitably translated into new numbers of patients coming into hospital. So these are the number of people in hospital all the way from the 1st of April through to the 1st of January. And you can see the first peak of people in hospital, then decreased due to the remarkable efforts of everyone in the country during the first lockdown and then through the summer months.
an increase which then again went down due to the second lockdown, but now really a very rapid increase, and I don't think you need any modelling to see in what direction the number of hospitalised patients with COVID is going, and this is going up very rapidly, and of course we are still in the middle of it.
Put your
next slide,
faith
please.
in it.
And sadly, of course, some of those people go on to die. This is the number of deaths of people who had a positive
axiomatic.
And there was an increase which led to the second lockdown, a decrease following that, but these numbers of deaths are now increasing again. They are, at this point, quite a long way below the first peak, and there are three reasons for that. The first of which is very good news, is that doctors, nurses, medical staff in general are able to manage this disease better than they did previously. Better drugs, things like dexamethasone, but also better treatment all round. The second reason is that there is an age effect, that some of the people who are being infected at the moment are younger age than in the first wave, but this obviously, what we've seen previously, is it moves up through the age bands over time. But the third reason is that deaths are much delayed, so what happens is people get infected, there's then a delay before they get ill enough to go into hospital, and then there's quite a long delay before some people sadly die. And we will unfortunately see, because of the spike in people going into hospital from the last slide, we will inevitably see an increase in number of people who die of this disease as we go into the rest of January. Thank you very much.
Why does every sentence end with "and people will die"?
Thanks very much. Let's go to questions from the public. Hannah from Northampton.
Pan.
Good evening. My question is, how are you supporting people with severe mental health issues? For example, my mum suffers from schizophrenia and doesn't understand the pandemic circumstances.
Some bad news for you, darling. Schizophrenia is genetic.
Thank you.
Well, Hannah, thank you very much for your question, and obviously I'm very sorry for the extra anxiety that the pandemic is causing people such as your mum, people with mental health conditions, and I totally understand why people are concerned. We've put a huge amount obviously into NHS mental health care, I think about another 12 billion or so, but directly during the pandemic. What we're doing now, Hannah, is trying to support some of the wonderful mental health care charities that reach out and work with people like your
better than nothing.
And I think we put about 19 or 20 million into that.
I think as well that how much money of
that's what we're doing at the moment. But clearly the best thing for your mother and everybody is that we get through this as fast as possible. Thank you, Hannah. Let's go to, unless anybody wants to add anything to that. Thank you. Let's go to Rachel from Reading.
I have two children at university, one in halls of residence and one in private accommodation. Could you advise how students will be supported to meet the cost of accommodation that they are not able to live in? And could the government advise if there is any support to reduce tuition fees or the need to repay student loans? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Well, obviously, we will be looking very carefully at what's happening to students as a result of the fact that their courses have been postponed, the absence of their tuition that they would expect. What we hope is that they will get online learning that will allow them to continue with their degree courses. But clearly, there are going to be issues to do with the cost of their accommodation that we will have to look at as a government and see what arrangements the universities are making to deal with the reasonable concerns of many students. And I want to thank students for the
I mean, other than like history people who need to like go to like libraries to pick up like some 15,000 texts. Do you know what I mean? They haven't been scanned yet.
A few weeks and months. I know it's a big sacrifice, but I believe sincerely it will be worth it for the reopening of education and the reopening of our lives. Thank you very much, Rachel. Let's go to Vicky Young of the BBC.
Prime Minister, the whole country is relying on you to take the right steps at the right time, and many think that you waited too long to bring in extra restrictions. How can I have confidence in your decision-making when on Sunday you insisted all schools should stay open and the very next day ordered them to close? And to Professor Whitty and Professor Valance, when did you first advise the government to lock down in England? And do you think the vaccine rollout timetable is realistic?
Ask one question.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Well, I think it's very important to
basically
understand
shitting
that
on Boris in the form of a question.
We've been looking at the new variant very hard ever since we first became aware of its rapid spread. I think on the 18th of December, and it's been clear that the Tier 4 measures were something that we wanted to evaluate, and over the course of the days leading up to Sunday, clearly, like everybody else in the country, we were hoping that we would start to see some impact, and that we would be able to keep schools open, because keeping schools open is an absolute priority for this country, and keeping kids in education is absolutely vital for this country. But Vicky, what we obviously had to contend with was figures, not just the decision by the 4 CMOs to go up to alert level 5, but figures for the infection rate, I think of 80,000 one day, then 65,000 the next. And it was clear that we got to a situation where Tier 4 on its own couldn't be relied upon to get the virus under control. And that's without really going the whole way and asking people to stay at home and sadly to close schools as well. And that's why we took the step that we did. And I appreciate the frustration of teachers and parents, and obviously the frustration of pupils. But can I repeat my thanks? I don't know whether I'm being premature in saying this, Vicky, but I believe that the BBC is coming forward with a big programme of education for 3 hours a day. That will be something, but the government will be doing everything we can to help with remote learning as well.
Shall I take half of the second one? The CMOs met yesterday morning and reviewed the data, which had been getting steadily worse in all 4 nations of the UK, and they advised that we should move to level 5 yesterday. Patrick might want to talk about sage advice independently of that. In terms of the vaccine timetable, my view is that the vaccine timetable is realistic, but not easy. And the NHS you have to use multiple channels to get this out, but they are very determined to do this. But that does not make it easy. And of course, in the case of the Pfizer vaccine, as I think is widely reported, it's more difficult to handle because of the complicated cold chain model.
Should be.
And we also, with both vaccines, wanted to be very careful in the first 2 or 3 days that we went a little bit slowly, just in case there were some initial
I had it right at the start.
problems.
But
I think we do now have a situation where things can be
maybe
across lots of different channels. And I think what is really important is that we do that according to the ordering, which has been recommended by the JCVI, which the Joint Commission on Vaccination and Immunisation, which the Prime Minister talked about. And the reason for that is that ordering means that we will have the maximum impact on the disease, because the people that by far the highest risk of dying will be vaccinated first, and those who care for them, then the next down, including NHS workers, social care workers, and then on down all the way through to people in their 50s and those under 50 who have other underlying health problems. By doing it in that way, at whatever speed we do, the mortality benefits will be front-loaded, and what we'll first see is a reduction in mortality over time, and then after that there will be a slowing of the pressure of COVID on the NHS, but that will take longer. So those two will not happen at the same rate. And the final thing to do is say that in the UK, we've taken a decision based on JCVI advice, but endorsed by scientific bodies like the Society for Immunology, endorsed by other medical bodies like the Royal College of General Practitioners, to delay the first dose of both vaccines by 12 weeks. And we've done this based on a number of different scientific lines of decision making. And that will allow us to maximise over the first 12 weeks the number of people who can be vaccinated. So we can get down those JCVI levels as fast as possible before the second
rubbish.
vaccine.
It's like giving everyone an antibiotic pill and saying, oh, it's because we want everyone
a high degree, not the complete protection, because everybody should have their second dose at 12 weeks, but that should provide a high degree of protection and get us through that as fast as we can, because we are facing, as I think the Prime Minister said and the data shows, a really serious emergency at the moment.
The increased transmissibility of the new variant was clearly a concern, and given the effects of restrictions, it was obvious that actually you need to do more in order to retain it if you've got a higher degree of transmissibility.
Or your strategy is completely wrong.
I think the view from Sage and the papers are there was that it was likely that more measures would be needed to retain transmission
it's hard to say that anything is obvious with a pandemic of this magnitude.
Nothing's obvious. Like even, I mean, like what's something that's obvious?
Well, 2 + 2 = 4 used to be obvious. No, apparently not.
Obvious is like a red flag word. Just as well, like why can't we just, is always followed by some simplistic thing of a complex issue. If things were obvious, we wouldn't have scientists.
Yeah, or people looking into things, right? We wouldn't have.
And when someone like that says things are obvious, it means that idiots who look at stuff and misinterpret it wildly, they just go, oh, well, it's obvious, isn't it? Like, that's not an argument for anything. I can't remember what this guy's talking about.
What's now borne out that you see very fast growth, very fast spread amongst all age groups, and it's going to need really much firmer measures in order to keep on top of this.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Let's go to Robert Peston of ITV.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Given that there are now 1 million people infected, what is the chance that we'll be out of lockdown before the end March, possibly even later? And secondly, to the scientists in particular, you'll be aware that some of your colleagues are concerned that by widening the gap between first and second dose, you are increasing the risk of the virus mutating and building up resistance to the vaccine. Could you quantify that risk for us, please?
Thanks, Rob. Let me have a go at the first one first. And I think it all depends. Our ability to come out of the lockdown measures, our ability to get through this fast depends on a number of things. And it, obviously, if provided we don't learn anything new about the virus that we don't yet understand, so there's not some new mutation that we haven't currently bargained for, provided the vaccine rollout goes according to plan, provided the vaccine is as efficacious as we think it is. But above all, provided that everybody follows the guidance now, everybody sticks to the measures that we have now, then we think that by the middle of February, when a very considerable portion of the most vulnerable groups will have been vaccinated, or so we hope and believe. That's the top 4 of the JCVI cohorts. Then there really is the prospect of beginning the relaxation of some of these measures. I wouldn't put it any stronger than that. But you'll also appreciate that there are lots of caveats, lots of ifs built into that. And the most important of which is that we all now follow the guidance and and
the important thing is that
the
people do
NHS
as they're told,
lives.
as opposed to.
I'll first go this, but Patrick, I want to add to this on the vaccine question. By extending the gap, we are going to, over the next 3 months, be able to essentially double the number of people who can be vaccinated. So if, by a process of not very difficult mathematics, if over that period there is more than 50% protection, then you've actually won. More people will have overall have been protected than would have been otherwise. And our quite strong view is that we think the protection will be quite a lot more than 50%. So therefore, in net public health terms, there'll be substantially more protection by going faster, not with the absolutely complete protection. We fully agree we need a second dose for everybody, but with the great majority of the protection for that initial period, so we get twice as many people vaccinated over that period, and then there will be catch-up as we go into spring. There are obviously some unknowns in that, and there's quite a vigorous scientific debate about some of those unknowns. And one of the things people have raised is the theoretical risk that by having this longer gap, you could actually lead to a slightly increased risk of an escape mutant. And that is a real worry, but quite a small real worry within the system. And I think we've discussed this, and Patrick may want to add to this, amongst scientists involved.
Yeah, it's like, wasn't the fact that a new variant would mutate and be more transmittable, wasn't that already a small risk, and it happened?
Yeah.
I don't understand, like what? Surely by compromising efficacy, you might actually put a selection pressure on that forces it to mutate, because
yeah, exactly.
Is that right? Like if you
literally, I mean, it's like giving everyone half a dose of antibiotic course, thinking, oh, you're going to get a bigger coverage because there'll be more people get antibiotics. That's just not how it works. I mean, they're playing with fire here, but I don't know.
Do viruses evolve more quickly than bacteria, right? So, like, antibiotic resistance is like a slower process, right? Because
yeah, viruses evolve very rapidly.
So, just simply thinking about it, you'd expect viruses to develop resistance to vaccines a lot more quickly than antibiotics do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Is it a risk worth taking though?
I don't think so.
I'd rather be locked down for longer and they do the vaccines properly.
Same.
Sage and others, and I think the general view was the size of the increase in risk is sufficiently small that, measured against this ability to double the number of people who actually are vaccinated, the public health arguments are really strongly for doing what we decided to do. And that's why JCVI independently, MHRA, were content with us taking this approach, and a variety of other bodies have agreed that this is a sensible balance of risk approval. Clearly, if we had infinite vaccine, we might have taken different approaches, but we don't. At this point in time, for the next 3 to 4 months, the number of vaccines we have available is going to constrain our ability to get through the 25 to 30 million people we must do to get through all of the JCVI areas. And whilst this is such a fast-moving virus at this point in time, our view was very strongly on balance of risk. The benefits to the UK, for us at this point of the epidemic, were in favour of doing this. Patrick may want to add to that.
Well, the only thing to add is the more you vaccinate, the more you put evolutionary pressure on the virus. So it's true that as you get up to very high levels of vaccination, that the virus is then struggling to find out what to do, and that eventually will become an issue. And the virus probably will mutate at that point, and that means that different vaccines will be needed in due course. And one of the, I think, very exciting things about the science behind this is the messenger RNA vaccines in particular are incredibly fast to make in response to new mutations, so that in due course, in years to come, as we think about this, that will be something that that I think gives an advantage to being able to get around it. But all vaccination will ultimately put some pressure on viruses to mutate.
Thanks very much. Sam Coates of Sky.
Prime Minister, there are 60,000 new infections recorded today, partly driven by kids spreading this new strain more readily. Parents want realism. Can you look parents in the eye and tell them that all kids will definitely be back in the classroom before the summer holidays. So Patrick Vallance, we've heard quite a lot recently about a second new variant. This is the one from South Africa. Has it reached our shores, and how worried should we be about the South African variant of coronavirus being resistant to the vaccine? And Professor Chris Whitty, how normal can life really be after just the 13.2 million most vulnerable alone have been vaccinated? Isn't the risk for those aged 20 up to 50 too high to let it rip through those age groups?
Well, Sam, I'll take the first one of those excellent questions, just on whether we can be absolutely sure that schools will reopen. Well, I just go back to the answer really I gave to Robert Pesson. We think that with the vaccination programme, we can do a huge amount to take out of the path of the virus those who are most vulnerable. That clearly offers opportunities to our country to do things differently, to approach the whole issue of non-pharmaceutical interventions.
I just checked the JCVI minutes for the 31st of December, where they're discussing the whether to do a first dose thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I searched the word risk, and it's not in the entire 7-page document. It's like, what the fuck, man?
Of course, right.
Very differently. So I'm full of the same optimism and fundamental hope about the position that I think Chris has adopted, that I think that things really will be very different by the spring. And that is what I would certainly say to every parent in the land.
So on the question of the variants, as a virus replicates, you get changes in the genetic code as new mutations come in and things change. And those changes in the genetic code then lead to changes sometimes in parts of the protein. And that may lead to shape changes or charge changes on the protein that might mean that the virus becomes recognised differently by the immune system. And that's really the concern that people are looking at. If I take the UK variant, what we know is that those changes, and there was 22 changes in the genetic code, made the virus more transmissible. As far as we can see, it doesn't make it hidden from the immune system. So if you had an infection before, actually the evidence is that you probably neutralise this virus as well, and the expectation is the same would be for a vaccine. With the South African variant, there's another change.
Right, so when you develop a vaccine, you target some specific part of the vaccine, right, that to get it to recognise it.
The virus. Yeah.
So if that is the bit that hasn't mutated, surely you just assume that the vaccine is going to work. And if that's the bit that has mutated, that's when you worry. Like, surely that's an easily answerable question if you just sequence all the variants and then see if it's the bit that's changed.
Yeah, that's basically it. I think I'm assuming that's what he's trying to get at in a really roundabout way.
Like, why don't these people like just speak simply?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't understand why he got all technical with charges and like. I mean, we don't need to like talk about the intramolecular and extramolecular forces that hold proteins together. Like that, there's no need for that. You don't need to get into the primary, secondary, tertiary structure of proteins. Like it's just jargon.
Well, I can explain to you how a car engine works without ever having to mention any of the laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah, the thing, you don't have to explain the diesel cycle to me, right? You don't have to explain or the Rand cycle. You don't have to explain these things, which is why I'm just puzzled that he decided to go into fucking Coulombic interactions, electrostatics, and all. Like a person without biochemistry understanding will hear electrostatics and think that's what happens when you rub a balloon. Like, there's absolutely no reason for him to go into electrostatics and charges and I don't know. It's just jargon. It's meaningless, stupid jargon.
The only way that would even make any sense if the new mutation isn't the part that we're targeting, but it prevents you from being able to see that part of the genome because it's created some way of protecting that specific sequence. But is that even possible?
No.
That change is theoretically a bit more substantial in terms of the shape, if you like. So it has a bit more of an effect potentially on the shape of the viral protein, which theoretically gives it a bit more risk of not being recognised. But there's nothing again yet to suggest that's the case. So this is being looked at.
No, I mean,
very actively.
it is true. You
And
change
it's
the
worth
sequence of the
remembering
protein,
that
change the structure.
when a vaccine is given, you don't just make one antibody against one bit. You make lots of antibodies against lots of different bits. And so it's unlikely that all of that would be escaped by any mutation. It's more likely that if there's an effect, it's a sort of minor effect to decrease the binding or decrease the efficacy of the vaccine. But we don't know yet for the South African one. That needs to be looked at. But it's a theoretical risk. And every time we see a variant, that's going to be the question that comes up, and it needs to be looked at. But at the moment, you'd say that the most likely thing is that this wouldn't abolish vaccine effect. It may have some overall effect on efficacy, but we don't know.
And on the question you asked me, if we did not do the things all of us must now do, if people don't take the stay at home seriously, the risk at this point in time, in the middle of winter with this new variant, is extraordinarily high. What is going to happen over time is the risk level is gradually going to decrease. It's not going to be it's really bad and then suddenly it stops. We're going to essentially have the risk walking down a path. Things will be able to be lifted by degrees, possibly at different rates in different parts of the country. We'll have to see.
Here's a fun idea that I've just thought of. You have like a random lottery that says, so you open up businesses, but only certain people are allowed to go out, and you're selected on a weekly basis. Like, oh, this week you're allowed to go out, as provided you don't have symptoms or whatever. So you drip feed people back into the economy that way, and because it's random, it's fair, and you don't select the same people until everyone else has been selected, kind of thing. So if they want to do, because everyone's expecting, right, it's going to be fine, and then we all go back. So you need to think of a way of getting people, a fair way of having people slowly come back into the economy.
But isn't that going to create a whole lot of opportunity for a scam? Like, imagine you get an email saying you've been randomly selected to be able to leave the house, input your credit card details so we can make sure it's you. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I feel like a whole lot of people are getting scammed if we try something like that.
You mean you could do that? You could do that scam now.
Well, no, because right now someone will just Google, is there a scheme to let random people out, and then they'll know that it's a scam. But if the government actually goes through with it, they would have to plaster everywhere how that email looks, and or they could do it by conventional mail, and that's even worse because then half the people probably wouldn't get their thing. It would be chaos. It would be horrendous. I like the idea, but I just don't think it's workable with the state of the population.
So,
yeah.
There would be a way to do it, but yeah, I see the risk.
Yeah. Right.
Government has made very clear that ministers prioritise education, for example, as one of the things that would go early, but that's a ministerial decision very much. But the things we lifted stage by stage, and we'll then get over time to a point where people say this level of risk is one that society is prepared to tolerate, and lift, right down to almost no restrictions at all. We might have to bring a few in the next winter, for example. That is possible.
We don't actually know what society is prepared to tolerate, though, because no one's asked us. I mean, you get these YouGov fucking polls, but what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah. Nothing like that has ever happened before. So how are we supposed to know what the public can and cannot tolerate?
Yeah, and plus, if they're citing the fact that people aren't following the rules as the reasons why these lockdowns aren't working, that indicates to me that people aren't willing to put up with this shit and are willing to just do what they want anyway. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, people in the north are already not giving a fuck.
Yeah, if they had a referendum, it definitely would be a 4% margin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
because winter will benefit the virus. But the aim of this is to de-risk it as much as possible by the vaccine, to the point where actually we get to the stage where the risk is incredibly low relative to where we are now. I mean, we just say, just as we do with flu, where every year, roughly on an average year, about 7,000 people a year die. In a bad year, up to 20,000 people a year die. We accept there is a level of risk that society will tolerate, and we should tolerate. People die. That's one of the things that happens, and we have to do that at a certain point.
Is that obvious?
People die. People die. It's just one of those things that happens.
Did you see my post about hunger and starvation?
Yeah.
That's mental. More people have died this week than have died from COVID.
Majid Nawaz said that like more people will die from malaria than of COVID. Easily. Like that's not even a question.
First world problems, isn't it?
Mm.
It is literally the first world.
Yeah.
But that's a political decision, that's a societal decision. What we can do, though, with the vaccine is take the risk down and down, initially with the mortality, then the big pressure on the NHS, then the risk of people actually having infections which could lead to things like long COVID, because younger people can still have really serious problems with this. And those risks, little by little, will be reduced by vaccination. But zero risk is not something which is a realistic possibility, and this will not happen in a single bound. It'll happen.
There's such a massive asymmetry with human beings and now against nature. We put all these selection pressures on viruses to make them better and better, but we remove all selection pressures that would remove weak people from society.
Mm.
It's yeah.
Just so
by degrees.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks, Sam. Let's go to Jason Groves, Daily Mail.
Thanks. Prime Minister, you've committed, I think, to vaccinate 13 million people in the next 6 weeks. That means something like 2 million people a week. What needs to happen to get us to that figure? What changes need to be made? Because we're nowhere near there at the moment. And I think you said we'd get daily updates for numbers. Can I just check, is that a commitment to publish a daily figure for how many people have been vaccinated? And Professor Whitty, can I ask you quickly, is this lockdown enough to reverse the spread of this virus? Or are we in a kind of race against time now? And you said we might need a few measures next winter still. What sort of measures are you talking about?
I don't think we can lock down any further.
Jason, and look on your...
Sorry?
Like he says, is this lockdown enough? Like, mate, what do you want us to do? Like, try to have astral projections instead of manifesting in an actual body. Like, what? I really don't understand. Like, is this lockdown enough? Like, I don't know. We could weld people shut indoors. That's the next option. That's what China did. You could, I don't know. It's nuts.
Very, very important questions about the pace of the vaccine rollout. You're absolutely right. Actually, I think the numbers for the first 4 JCVI groups might be a little bit north of, a little higher than 13 million, but we're going to do them as fast as we possibly can. We've set the target, as you know, by the middle of February. Yes, it is a huge effort. This is the biggest vaccination program in the history of this country, and this country has already, I think, done more than any, certainly done more than any other European country.
World beating.
What it will require is a lot of people working together, and the NHS, the armed services. Every aspect of government is working at this absolutely flat out. The rate limiting the factor at the moment is making sure that we can get enough vaccine where we want it fast enough. And one of the problems, as you know, is that the AstraZeneca vaccine, which has just come on stream, needs to be properly batch tested, properly approved before it can be put into people's arms. And this is just a process that takes time to do. But we will be ratcheting it up over the next days and weeks ahead in the way that you describe, and we'll be giving more details on Thursday of where we've got to. I've given the figures today, and what we'll be trying to do, Jason, is to try to and then daily from Monday. And what we'll be trying to do is to try to break down some of these figures for people, so everybody can see which groups are getting the vaccine and how it's being distributed across the country. Because my feeling is this is something of massive national interest, and we've really got to be as transparent as we can possibly be.
Mm. Yeah, they should be vaccinated, surely.
Why are we vaccinating NHS workers if so many of them already had the virus as well?
Yeah. Well, I guess for the ones who haven't had it yet, I don't know. I think we should. Yeah, I don't know. So frustrating.
So what they're doing, they're just going. Right now, it's frontline workers who are defined basically as NHS, and then anyone who is over 80. So we're not, because they said it's going to take till mid-February to even vaccinate all the over 80s.
Yeah.
But then meanwhile, you've got... It's a tricky one, though, because, like, surely you want to prevent, like, vectors of transmission. And a good way to find out if you improve the... if you reduce transmissibility is to vaccinate people in places where there's going to be a lot of people despite the fact they're in lockdown, which is, supermarkets, public transport, like bus drivers and stuff. Or people that have to go to work because they can't work from home. It just seems odd that they're just doing it as oldest to youngest, and then NHS as well, because there's more people are at risk than just those groups.
I guess you gotta weigh it out against actual mortality per demographic. Like people in their 20s to 50s, like mortality is almost non-existent. Do you know what I mean? Like if you get it when you're 18, you it's a coin flip, right? If you get it when you're like even 50, you'll probably make it. No. I don't know. It's tricky. Yeah.
You asked me whether the lockdown will be enough. I think the key to this is all of us buying into this really seriously. If we all buy into this, people stay at home. If people, apart from the things which are like work, going out for essential shopping, exercise, if people stick to those rules really strongly, and
I don't think these people recognise what essential means to some people, because actually going to the pub might be essential for someone. Like, to keep their mental health in check, they need to go out and socialise and wind down at the end of the day. Like, I was talking to my friend Ronan about it, and he was saying how a lot of police officers, they'll go to the pub, to wind down because they've, their job's fucking hard. And
it's not the same if you do it via Zoom. It's just not the same, isn't it?
No.
Yeah.
And I don't Tesco are stopping you from being able to buy kitchenware and clothing. It's like, who decided that those were unessential? Does the government have a list of essential and non-essential items?
Jobs. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, during the war, they actually had a list of essential things like flour. So bakers were essential workers and shit. But now, are farmers essential? Are butchers essential? Like, we can't just
how long have they had to just come up with some kind of list that people could then argue about and say, actually, you need to put this on, or that's not so essential? could that not have been done like throughout the year? Like what have people been doing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like a reverse of a sunken cost fallacy. It's that you don't want to, you think, oh, the virus is going to be over soon. There's no point devoting time into like deciding what's essential and what's not. Do you know what I mean? And then the virus is a little bit longer, and then you kind of like, oh, well, we've been here for so long. The virus will probably be over soon. There's no point in and it just keeps going and going and going.
But it's one of those things that's like worth investigating, because then you have that list available.
Yeah.
The next time something like this happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe we should come up with a list.
Send it to the government, get some grant money.
I've made a list, but it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
At the same time, the NHS is vaccinating as fast as it can, then our hope is the lockdown will be enough. But we've all got to do that. This has very much got to be a collective effort. No one can do this on their own. You can't just do it by rules. It's got to be people buying into this really seriously. In terms of longer term things, obviously what we all hope is that we can get a vaccine programme that actually means we don't need anything in the future at any stage. That would be the ideal. But I think it's also important to understand that this coronavirus is not going to go away, just as flu doesn't go away, just as many other viruses don't go away. And the time that benefits them most is always winter. That's one of the reasons we're having problems now, along with the new variant. And therefore,
That's not always true, though. What didn't flu originally was a summer disease, and then for some reason, which they don't know, it switched.
Possibly.
Can't remember the reasoning for it. It was on Brett Weinstein and Heather were talking about it at the start. They were talking about flu being a seasonal disease, but with the opposite seasonality. But I can't remember why it was or why it changed.
I mean, yeah, interesting. It is weird, but by the looks of it, we are going to shape up to have like a flu in November and then COVID in January kind of a situation from now on. I suspect going to become endemic.
Yeah.
I mean, if you said that thing, like flu has been endemic since the 1918 pandemic, right?
Yeah.
That's when. That's when, since then, it's kind of been like, okay, well, it's there every year, because it was one of those like big like 4-year flu cycle, and then since then it's always just been endemic. So this probably is like the big moment for COVID where it just becomes endemic. There's always like some residual amount that like flares up every year, and the only thing we can do is like hope that we get the right vaccine in time.
About that. The hope would be we don't need to do anything, certainly nothing on the scale we're having to do at the moment, because vaccination should take the great majority, possibly all, of the heavy lifting. But I think what we shouldn't kid ourselves is it just disappears with spring. What will happen with spring is the risks go right down. Hopefully we'll have spring, summer and autumn, possibly winter as well, with almost nothing in place once the full vaccination programme is through. But we just need to be aware of the fact this is not a problem that just disappears.
Thanks very much, Jason. Let's go to Andy Woodcock, Independent.
Prime Minister, we understand that the UK is shortly going to introduce mandatory negative coronavirus tests for foreign nationals flying to the country. Tests are something that airports have been asking for months. They've been used successfully in other countries for a very long time now. Why has it taken so long for Britain to adopt this position? Is that something that has contributed towards coronavirus being so persistent here in the UK? And if that's what we're requesting from foreign nationals, why not UK nationals coming from abroad too? And also, if I could ask the scientists, the Prime Minister has described schools as a potential vector for coronavirus. If that's the case, why is it that teachers and pupils are not on the priority list for vaccination? If we vaccinated them, is that not something which would allow us to open schools sooner?
Well, thanks, Andy. First of all, I'll ask Chris and Patrick to answer about transmission in schools. I just repeat that schools are safe. On what we're doing to protect the UK from transmission from abroad, we will be bringing in measures to ensure that we test people coming into this country and prevent the virus from being readmitted. But Patrick or Chris, you want to add anything on that?
I mean, on school, but two points on this. The first thing is just to reiterate a point the Prime Minister made. One thing that we do not think is that this new variant is any more dangerous for children than the old variant is. And there's no evidence, for example, the hospitals are filling up with children. There is always a risk with any infection to people of all ages, but children are relatively much less affected than other areas, than other groups, which is one of the few good things you can say about coronavirus. And that will be important when schools can go back. In terms of vaccination priority, I think from a clinical point of view, the real priority is to make sure that we know who the people are who are by far the most likely to die and are by far the most likely to end up in hospital. And it's that ordering which the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, JCVI, has put in place, and which everybody who's looked at this has agreed this is correct ordering. Lots of academics, lots of others have looked at it, and they all agree. So I think it's very important that ordering,
lots of academics,
not just to
lots of academics, fucking some high right there.
The Prime Minister talked about, but all the way down to people who are in their 50s.
It's been debunked,
teachers, obviously, and people who've got underlying health conditions, is followed through, because those are the people who are the most likely to come at risk. Then that still leaves around half of slightly more than half of the population, and there will have to be some decisions made about that in due course, but we are some way from that. And I think the key thing is prioritise those who are most likely to come to clinical harm. A final point on the vaccine is neither of the vaccines are currently licensed for use in children, so we would not be going down that path at this stage, but that may obviously change over time. Patrick, do you want to add to that?
Terrific, thanks, Andy. Let's go to Dominic Yateman of Metro.
Well, I find odd that you said they're not licensed to be used on children. Like, why would that be? Is that because they haven't been clinically tested on them?
Well, good question. Yeah.
Because which one is it? I can't remember if it's the Pfizer or the Moderna or the AstraZeneca one, but it was only clinically trialled on up to age 55, I think. I think it might have been the Oxford one, the AstraZeneca.
Well, the AstraZeneca apparently crashed and burned. I don't know what's happening with that one. Like after the because of the whole if you had a smaller dose, you're more protected. That thing which they weren't able to explain.
Oh yeah.
That's why people are worried. Yeah.
Oh, so they don't.
I don't know. I think it's been approved now.
Well, didn't Boris just say a few minutes ago that it's awaiting batch approval or something?
So we have the very first people are about to have it administered, but I'm skeptical because of the whole if they can't explain this data that doesn't make sense, then you're by definition should be worried.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's classic science. How is the lower dosage giving people better protection? Unless you can explain that to me somehow, then yeah. Yeah, this doesn't make any sense. But I mean, as long as we don't start seeing, children with 7 arms or something being born, I don't care.
Hi there, Prime Minister. The UK has seen more than 50,000 people test positive for coronavirus for 8 days in a row now. If you had taken this lockdown decision 24 hours earlier, it would have stopped 3 million primary school children mixing for a day and taking a new wave of infection back to their families. Do you regret this delay? And secondly, if I may, nearly 1 million children access the internet via mobile phone connections, where a day's lessons can cost £100 on pay-as-you-go. Do you still insist that schools are safe? Shouldn't those children be in school? And if not, why are telecom companies allowed to charge for access to school and educational websites still?
Yeah, well, I mean, in a way, Andy, I think you've. Sorry, Dominic, you've answered. Forgive me. You've answered your question about why did we want to keep schools open. It's just such an imperative for any country and any society. And as I said, I think to Vicky from the BBC, we wanted to do everything we could to make that possible. Alas, on yesterday, it became clear that the data simply wasn't going to support that, and the risk was that the tiering system, the tier 4 system, without taking schools out of the equation.
If you can push through the Coronavirus Act through Parliament without a vote on it or a debate on it, I'm pretty sure you can close schools without getting the permission from this body. I forget which one they talked about, but
exactly. It's a bit ludicrous to think, we're making this unilateral decision without the approval of Parliament to delay the vaccine. But no, we couldn't, lock down schools 24 hours earlier. No, that's going to require parliamentary approval. Like, I feel like if this is not codified, then it should be codified. Like maybe we just need a constitutional amendment that specifically says what the executive can and can't do, because to me it just looks like we're being fucked with. Like,
yeah, it's they just hide behind whatever.
Yeah,
my hands are tied.
Yeah.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
You're gonna do that. So it's talking to Nadine.
It was just not going to be enough on its own. We couldn't take that risk, and although we're now seeing some signs that maybe Tier 4 is starting to work in London and maybe a bit in the southeast on the new variant, the spread of the new variant was really very, very troubling indeed. And so that's why we took the action that we did. We don't want to do it. We want to support kids in school if we possibly can. I'm glad that the BBC is as I say, putting a lot of educational stuff on TV. That is fantastic. We are also looking at the very point that you make about the potential cost to parents of online teaching, and we're going to do our best to support them in any way that we can, and to work with the internet companies to see what we can do to help, because this unquestionably will be a tough period. And all I can say is what we want to do is get back to a position as fast as possible where we can get kids back in school, and that's why we're doing all the things that we're doing now. Thanks very much, everybody. I appreciate that this is a very, very tough final stretch for this country. It's been made tougher by the new variant, much tougher, alas, by the new variant. But the jabs are going in to people's arms day by day. We'll keep you updated on what is going on. And in the meantime, I must repeat the basic message. What we've got to do is to stay at home.
Repeat it until it's engraved in your brain.
Lives. Thanks, everybody.
So there's the Prime Minister ending that latest coronavirus briefing from Downing Street. Let's just recap the main points for you from the Prime Minister and his scientific advisors. Boris Johnson.
Yeah. Oh my God. That was horrible. That was dreadful.
Oh well.
Oh.